Hello. This week on International Women's Week, I've had the pleasure and privilege of interviewing some very, very inspirational women. And today I have the delight to talk to Johanne Penney from Amp Up Your Voice. So Johanne, absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And, it's International Women's Day today, or it will be this week, and the theme is embrace equity. So I thought we'd start with asking, what does that mean to you?
I think it's a global call to action. So really, it's about how do we come together collaboratively to actually start changing the dynamics and the narrative. But the whole theme of embrace equity is that call to action for everyone to really, work together to start really making some systemic changes and outcomes. And I think, we do need to have that impact in terms of gender equality.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. And you and I are both in the field of equity. And we know how sometimes it's a long way out of reach, isn't it, equity? It's a nice word to say, but is it really happening?
Well, I think the honest answer to that is it is, but at a glacial pace. So it's actually moving quite slowly. I think the World Economic Forum estimated last year that on the current trajectory, it's going to take circa 270 years to reach gender pay parity.
It makes me want to cry.
Makes you want to cry. So when you look at those evidential factors, yes, we can see lots of shifts. We can see lots of shifts in the corporate space, which is fantastic. But we still do have a really long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you have your business now and you're very, very successful, but you have had to come a long way and overcome quite a lot of adversity to get there. So tell us about your story.
So as you said, I'm the CEO and founder of Amp Up Your Voice, and that is primarily an anti-racism and a diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy. Which means I work with modern brands and businesses who are authentically on their journey to diversify and really secure that inclusion and psychological safety piece in the corporate space. But the reason why I started doing the work is, like you said, because I did face that adversity, and what I experienced was firsthand racial discrimination in the workplace. And it was late 2019, and to be honest with you, I was completely blindsided. It decimated my personal life, my professional life, and I really, had to take stock and work out what I wanted to do. So my embryonic thinking for Amp Up Your Voice was really about, how do I support other Black women who are perhaps navigating systemic barriers to success, who need to, have that executive coaching and mentoring. And then very shortly afterwards, we had the very public murder of George Floyd, the propelling of Black Lives Matter into the mass media, and we were all thrown into the height of a pandemic, right? So it made us question our values and, who we are as people and whether we do have a level playing field. But what I was able to do in terms of my experience was to take they asked me to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, gave me a significant amount of money. And what I was able to do was take that and really set up the consultancy to really start, because my whole objective, my whole idea was to really, try and achieve that equitable playing field for women, for Black women. And actually it goes across all protected characteristics. So yeah, that's my story.
It's amazing, and I totally appreciate, because of the NDA you can't talk about specific instances, but you said that the discrimination that you received affected you, your personal life and everything else. So how did it feel for you?
I mean, I was completely lost. I really identified with my career. So actually losing that was, really did affect me in a personal way and a professional way. And like I said, it did affect my family. It affected who I was as a person, what I wanted for my future. It made me question everything that had come before. And to be honest with you, I have experienced a lot of incidents, discrimination, racism, but not in the way that this was so overt, and there was no sort of question that the only differential factor was the fact that I was Black. So that really sort of hit to the core in terms of my identity, I think. So, it took a long while to actually really get back on that journey and work out who I was, what I wanted to do, what I was going to do, in a professional sense, and how I was going to help the world, I suppose. Yeah.
So you moved from a place where equity was definitely not embraced, to a place where you're learning your skills to support other women. Because as you're talking there, and I was thinking, there are many women who've been discriminated against, whether it's race, whether it's for their sexual orientation, disability, anything at all, who perhaps would not have felt strong enough to fight. And I know many of the people I coach who've been through situations like that, or start to fight and then decide to not. And that must have been a very hard thing for you to do.
And I would say actually at the time when I was going through it, there was a lot of people who did discourage me from taking action and said, "Oh, don't worry about it," and I don't think it's that, and don't sweep it under the carpet. And actually, I'm a person that will really, I do pick my battles very carefully, but I just knew that it was one battle that I definitely was going to have, because of this, the unfairness of it all was so damning that I really couldn't, I couldn't do that. I couldn't sweep it under the carpet. But I think you do find, in terms of this conversation, and you'll know that from being, working in this field, that not necessarily everybody recognises some of those systemic barriers to success. They don't recognise what women go through in the workplace, what Black and ethnically diverse people go through in the workplace. And I think, in terms of, like you were saying, about people being empowered to have that voice, I do think there's been a massive shift since the murder of George Floyd. So I always say that, 2020 was like this global awareness movement, when there was this real recognition that, we don't have an equitable playing field, we don't have a level playing field. And there is this responsibility, this individual and collective responsibility to do the right thing. And then 2021 and 2022 was very much tactical. We saw lots of recruitments of heads of ED&I or DE&I, or whatever the acronym is that you want to use. And I think now in 2023, there is still a disconnect. And I think that is, how do we take that theoretical, that educational piece that we've all been through, and turn that into tangible, practical, fundamental outcomes. But what it did do was give people, and we were in COVID as well, and it gave people the time to have a reset, really think about, like I said, your values and what it meant to you, and it gave people a voice. It's really given women a voice. It's given, but all protected characteristics. And I think people were so much more likely now to have these conversations and to talk about the inequity that they experience, to talk about the unfairness, to talk about the gender pay gap in a way that we did not do before. So I think, yes, it was an awful situation, but there was a real sort of moment in history when there was a real sea-changing attitude. And I think that's the empowering part. And that's the part where we can really, I think really garner it now to really sort of start making some of those shifts, because no one's piping down, no one's going to be quiet anymore. Like you said, there are some people that still do need that coaching to help them get through those, navigate what is a very thorny landscape, actually. But I think the tide has definitely changed, and for that I'm really excited, because I think I don't think we're not going to go back to where we were before, pre-2020. And look, we've all had ED&I and DE&I training for years upon years upon years, but I think the difference is now that it is, before it was a bottom-up approach,
Yeah.
So it was the people that really cared about it and people that were passionate about it, trying to do it sort of at that grassroots level or a junior level. But now I think that actually leadership teams, exec teams, boards are recognizing that, you know, they need to be on board with this conversation.
It's
They
so
need to be
true.
able to
So true.
navigate it. Yeah.
And for you, and you know, something you and I talk of a lot about, which perhaps not everybody listening will have a good understanding. It's not just race, it's intersectionality, isn't it? Because it's about other types of privilege, and female. And so sometimes when you're in a situation, it's hard to identify, do I feel discriminated against because I'm a woman, because of my race, because I'm a single parent, because it's socioeconomical, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, intersectionality, I think that there has been that real recognition now that we cannot put people in boxes, you know, and that's what a lot of what I talk about in my training. And what I do is really about, you know, how do we actively replace like stereotypes? How do we mitigate our bias? How do we move towards conscious inclusion? And a big part of that is recognizing people aren't in a singular box.
Yes.
They can identify with so many different protected characteristics.
Yeah.
And so actually you do, as a business, need to have that holistic view of who your people are, how they feel, how they want to be identified, how they want to be spoken about. And I think really sort of leaning into your demographic and leaning into your staff to understand that is really a fundamental part of this journey. I also say that even if you lean in and you listen, that's great, but you have to be able to take whatever you've heard and introduce that into your executive decision making.
Absolutely.
Otherwise you're
so
not going to.
Yeah,
yeah,
so powerful. So for other women then, what's your tip if they're in a situation where they don't feel there's fairness and equity? What would be your tip?
Oh, I've got a couple of tips. I think one very practical tip is if you feel like you're in a situation or someone said something that you feel is not okay or discriminatory, is to ask them to repeat what they said.
Oh, nice.
Or ask them, and so you have a bit of time to reflect, and also you're bouncing it back on them to say, can you underpin that with, I need a bit of more comprehensive understanding of what you mean, and it then makes them think about what they've said or done. So it's quite a clever way to address and sort of positively disrupt in a way that is, you know, not that is very sort of calm and very factual. And I think for, you know, a big part of advocacy is like speak up culture. Yeah. So I think for other people in the room, I think it's really important that you're able to, again, confidently navigate the conversation, positively disrupt if you see things, witness things that are not going quite right, to disrupt those situations.
I think that's so powerful. I once remember hearing a woman say that when she was very, very young and she went into a very male-dominated environment, the first day she was there, somebody told a very sexist joke and she actually didn't understand it. So she said to the man, "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Could you explain?" And saw the discomfort and carried on through her career using it as a technique. And I think that's brilliant. Every time somebody said something like that, she would say, I don't understand. Could you explain that?
Yeah, and that's precisely what, you know, what I've just said. It's like you just get them to reflect on what they've done or what they've said, because sometimes we know we've all been in that situation. It's very difficult, and it depends on what type of person you are as well. I'm a reflective thinker. I'm a person that needs to process. So if something's happening, I might not immediately react, but I will go away and reflect on that and then think, oh, what do I say? So I suppose for those people, they can still do it. Yeah. You don't have to necessarily do it at the time, but you could the next day, or if you go into the office.
After the meeting,
yeah. After the meeting, I didn't really understand that. You know, what did you mean by that?
I love that. So equity means creating an inclusive world. So what messages would you like to send to women who are fighting for equity?
I just think we have to keep going. I think one of my strongest ethoses for Amp Up Your Voice is women supporting women. There's a lot of power in connections and in collaboration. So I think, you know, that cumulative effect will really make a difference. But I think we still all have to keep fighting the fight, you know, like positively disrupting, you know, educating ourselves on what inequality looks like and how it shows up on a daily basis. And you know, I do think we can't lose the faith, because we have come so far, you know.
Yeah.
We have come so far. So it's just about maintaining that power, supporting each other, particularly when you get to a senior level. For women, how can you advocate for other women? How can you, what's within your gift, so what's within your personal remit, power and influence to advocate for others? So in a sense, like, how can you lift others up? And that sort of translating that into sort of very practical terms, you know, how can you use your remit to professionally engage and help others to professionally engage in a way that's going to help them grow and grow their careers?
I think that is so powerful, isn't it? Because it feels like it's kind of a tug of war, and we can't let go of the rope because we're going to lose some ground. So we need more women behind us, and to my final question, really, more male allies. And as you know, a lot of the work that I do is trying to help men understand how they can be allies to women. But what would you like to see men doing more of to support equity?
Well, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. It's really about that understanding and having that key educational piece in terms of what is actually going on. So what I would encourage men to do is really have that, you know, educational journey in terms of what that looks like for women in terms of equity. You know, and you know, everyone has family that, you know, has females in it. So I suppose it's really trying to, you know, getting men to understand why we're having this conversation, what, you know, what we're trying to achieve. And for them, they need to put in the work. They need to do the educational piece in terms of what that looks like, and like I said, how that shows up. And again, and also men, you know, men who are in positions of power and influence, how do you, again, positively disrupt? How do you advocate for women within your remit? And I think that takes a bit of reflective thinking. So, you know, it's not going to be, you know, what's relevant to you is not going to be relevant to another man, but like, what is it that you can? And I think people just need to take a bit of time out to really sort of understand where they can use their power.
I absolutely agree, and the message that I'm sending out on the video for International Women's Day is to men. And one of the things that I'm asking is, please walk a week in our shoes. Just keep stopping in every situation and thinking, how would a woman feel doing this? Would she feel safe? Would she feel comfortable? Because if you don't understand what it feels like to walk in somebody else's shoes, then okay, I can understand that you don't know how to help them. And so, you know, I think it's a two-way thing, isn't it? If men could educate themselves a bit more about some of the daily battles that we face, and they are battles sometimes.
They are.
But also at the same time, really think about how can they advocate? And as you said, can they, you know, put forward women to do presentations if they're asked to do them themselves, or they know that a woman's an expert, you know, can they speak up for somebody at a meeting if their idea has been hijacked? And you know, all small things, but if every man did it, wouldn't it make a difference?
Yeah, because it would have that cumulative effect, right? Yes. And I always say, look, sometimes it's easy to see the gold standard and the end goal, but often not the reality of what it takes to actually get there. Yeah. And you know, I really strongly believe that having conversations and talking to people on you know, a one-to-one of what the experiences that they're going through will really help you resonate and get that educational piece. Otherwise, everything you think you know about women and gender equality is what you've read, or what you've seen on Netflix, or you know, what you've listened to on a podcast. So you know, really, how do you actively replace sort of stereotypes? How do you see people as people, as humans, as individuals. How do you see women as women? And like you said, once you start doing that, you'll be able to authentically put yourself in their shoes.
That's a fabulous message to send out. And Jo, as always, I could speak to you for hours on this topic, but thank you so much for being part of our International Women's Week celebration. And please keep doing what you're doing, because it's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm sure we could talk for hours and hours, but thank you so much.
Thank you.